I first found out about them because I was a regular attendee at the Pacific Playwrights Festival at South Coast Repertory Theater. I would just go every single year. And one of those years I met Sarah, and she was there, and I heard about this new company, so obviously it's been a minute. And I started to track her career and what she was doing. So it really was just meeting somebody in person and hearing about the company in a very organic sort of way. I think it's really important to have a group like Breath of Fire because you have a company that is focused on Latinx women. And I think it's really easy to think about Latinx theater in a broader way, and it is very inclusive in so many ways. But it's also really special and unique to have a woman-centered theater, and I think that that's a uniqueness that I'm interested in seeing sustained and kept. I think it's because, when we look at bilingual plays, we're really looking at plays that dance in both languages. And sometimes Spanish becomes just a flavor. Sometimes it becomes a primary language and English becomes a secondary language. It really depends on the play. But it gives us a chance to live in two universes at once, which is what Latino playwrights do. They live in these two worlds. And Spanish is just a physical manifestation of what those two worlds feel like and how they behave and what they truly are. I always think of it as having one foot on both sides of the border and this feeling of like somehow existing in between. And I think that's the experience of the Latinx person. And it's certainly the experience that we have when we experience a play that might be leaning more toward a language we're not as familiar with, or perhaps it's our experience that, hey, these are the two languages that dance in my head. My mother is a teacher, and she taught me how to read, and there's a photo of me with a notebook and a pencil, and I look about 3, and I believe I was writing. As I was still learning how to make the letters, I was already trying to attempt to write. It was just always something that was part of me and something that wanted to come out. I got really serious about writing when I was in high school. I started to write regularly, creative work, fiction primarily. And it wasn't until I was 18 that I wrote my first play. But looking back, that's actually fairly young to write a first play. So I just, I got to it. It was something that once I found playwriting, I was really in love with the art form, and I just continued to do it. And, I've just written so consistently since that in my plays. I have a really large body of work with a really large variety of different types of plays. And I really credit that to the 10,000 hour concept of, just going at something and continuing it and mastering something. Although I think I also like to practice beginner's mind, so I don't really like to use the phrase mastery. I really believe that when I approach each new play, I approach it as if I've never written a play before, and let the play reveal itself to me, what structure it wants to have, how it wants to be, what the characters want to be. I really do believe in listening to the play. I started writing plays, and it was like standing on an uneven ground. I loved writing, and I knew that this playwriting thing was burgeoning inside me, but I wasn't really clear on theater as much. I would go to plays a lot as a student, particularly as a college student. And what I started to do was to attend them and then re-attend them and try to sort of make it not so noticeable, because I found it kind of embarrassing that I was going back to see the same play again. But now that I'm, older and wiser, I realized that I was really trying to figure out how they operated, like how did plays work and how did they speak to themselves. And I realized even at that point as a college student that plays were meant to be in 3 dimensions and not the 2 dimensions of the page. And how would I as a playwright then begin to imagine the 2 dimensions, in the 2 dimensions, a 3-dimensional world. And at the same time, or shortly before that, I had taken a test as a high school student called ASVAB. It was a military test. And I had scored in the 90th percentile on the ability, on this thing called spatial relations, with this ability to look at a box and figure out how it would unfold or refold. And the military actually hounded me for a while because they thought I had this special gift. And I later, reflected on it and realized, I think that's the same thing as being a playwright, being able to imagine what this box looks like unfolded. So I think for me, I started writing and there was passion there, but really the first time I heard my work in front of an audience and saw that feelings that I had that I expressed on the page or characters I had written were suddenly touching them and moving them. I remember particularly one of my early full-length plays. it was quite a large theater. I think they had like a 500-seat house, and we had a fairly good crowd. And I just remember writing this play, and it was being performed. It had been a hard process that time, and this man came up to me in tears, a Mexican man in tears. I was just completely gobsmacked. And there he was, and he felt the play had spoken to him. And I think having that kind of response, you know, as a playwright, those are the moments that you fall in love with playwriting over and over again, because you realize that human experience has its universal quality, and things that you may feel alone as a human being, or things that you may suffer with as a human being, and if you have the courage to put them on the page, you then realize that you're not alone. And I would hope that the theater and these experiences that I've had as a playwright reveal that our audience also learns that they're not alone. And that's one of the beautiful things about theater. I believe it's one of the most human art forms, because we have such an immediate attachment connection to our audience. We so immediately know what they experience. And we don't have an illusion if they didn't understand something. We sort of see it. So, you know, it has a really, really strong, loud feedback form within it. And that can be very hard for a writer, but it can also be very, very inspiring. Well, Swastika was a commission. I was commissioned by American Blues Theater in Chicago, Illinois, where I lived for 5 years. And they had awarded me the Blooming Playwriting Award for my play, Graveyard of Empires. So we had a good relationship. And they had asked me to write a play for the Living Newspaper Festival, which is inspired by a WPA project in which people would write plays based on newspaper articles. And I had taught at Northwestern University for a year. And I was familiar with the location of this particular incident, and I was familiar with the incident because it had happened really just a couple days, I think, before I wrote the play. And the incident was a chapel on campus that was defaced during the election time. This was May 2016, with hate, you know, words of hate, and also hate speech is what we call it, and also swastika. And I had not even read the article. I just saw the idea, and I started to think of what the play could be. And then when I started to investigate the article, I saw that one of the students involved was a Latino student. And I was so surprised, because I had thought, oh, I'm a Latina playwright. I'll just take this idea. And obviously this particular play is not, it isn't the specifics of that event. In fact, that's just the inspiring event. It's not the event itself. The story that I wrote is my own. But I was just inspired by looking at it and thinking of what it takes to go to a school like Northwestern, and what it requires of families and kids, and what it would mean if you got yourself expelled by doing something hateful. And what does it mean for you as a human being? I mean, how do you move on in your life as a human being when you've done something, or done something that basically marks you as a racist forever, and maybe within your own mind? And how do you manage that? And how do your parents, in this case, how does your parent try to reconcile the person they raised and the person they poured their life's blood into with the person that this person has become? So that's where the play came from, you know, this mix of knowing a general idea of a place, and then just using my imagination about relationships between parents and children, and what happens when your child morally deviates from you, and how do you try to win them back? Do you try to change where they stand? You know, this is a question I think many parents are probably asking. You know, we're in this moment where there've been a lot of school shootings, ridiculously high amounts. And what has happened? You know, how has a human strayed? And that's a question I think we need to be asking in this moment. Also, the fact that I did write the play before the election, there was a feeling that I felt that hate was growing, and that hate was becoming more acceptable. And I really wanted to nip that in the bud as a playwright. You know, as a Latinx writer, and also as somebody who lives from the border, I'm super aware of, you know, what's happening in this country right now, what's being said about, you know, Mexican people, Mexican American people. And I feel a responsibility to shed light on that, you know, take out my little flashlight and say, hey, look at where we're headed, and to reflect on the past, and to reflect on the history, and to reflect on of Holocaust in this moment, because these kinds of events in which there are exterminations of people begin with hate and hate speech. It is written to have a quick, fast impact. And so it's my hope that the audience will feel that impact of this mother mourning what has become of the son she once knew. And perhaps on some level, the son mourning who he's become, or having to somehow find a way to justify, or maybe not justify, find a way to sit with who he has become. And perhaps by sitting with their dilemma and their problem, we can reflect on this country as a whole and what have we become? Have we let swastika be somehow engraved into our earth? And if so, how do we feel about that? And are we willing to do the hard work of erasing that? Well, what inspires me is to write is really what I talked about earlier, is moving others. Also, I believe these characters sort of appear and they demand that they be heard. I am also really interested in what happens in the world and in big events of the world. But via these characters that come to me, I'm able to talk about things that I care about in the world. And not in a preachy way, but just to kind of shed light and to reveal what I see. I'm really interested in being in the background in a way. I'm interested in the play speaking for itself. I'm interested in the characters telling us their stories. So I'm inspired by theater itself, by good plays. You know, if I see a good play, I have a great day. If I see a bad play, I'm in a bad mood. So I have this very strong connection to theater. I know a lot of times when I'm at a play, I feel like I'm experiencing it more viscerally often than many people around me. And I see that in a lot of playwrights as they watch other plays, even plays they have not written, that they have this sort of deep connection to theatrical language and theatrical moments in which they feel really part of something, even if they haven't created it. And I think because I'm able to give myself over to plays as an audience member, I'm able to give myself over to plays as a playwright. If I just lived in a critical space in my head about every play I saw, I don't think I would be as prolific a playwright. I think the commitment to loving what I'm in, and not saying that I don't think critically at all, but just this idea that I'm here to embrace the play and let it reveal itself to me. I'm not here to revise the play as I watch it. Just having made that adjustment in my head has made me a better audience member, a more generous audience member, but it's also helped me unlock a lot more of my own plays. What I think about is that as Latinx people, we live in two worlds. And sometimes those are two cultural worlds, and we're merely experiencing these two cultures at once. And sometimes those are bilingual worlds in which we're experiencing two languages at once. And I think bilingual theater gives us a chance to enter perhaps through our primary language at different points, you know, and sometimes bilingual plays are heavily in English, but a little Spanish, and sometimes it's the other way, and sometimes they're totally balanced. It just depends on the playwright and the play and the story that's being told. But I think that bilingual plays invite us to know what it's like to have a foot on both sides of the border. They invite us to feel what it's like to be in two worlds. And I think, you know, that sometimes, you know, I'll write a play, and this happened to me really recently. I had written this play in English a really long time ago. And at some point, the National Theater in Panama, via a university there, had decided to produce the play in Spanish, so the play was translated. And then it was done in Los Angeles recently in Spanish. And then I decided to do a longer version of the play, because it was also a short play. Although, trust me, I don't just write short plays. It just happens to be that that's how I land in this breath of fire right now. And I remember as I was sitting down to write this play that was going to be longer for a director from Mexico who was going to be directing it in Spanish, but I was writing it in English, that I was somehow thinking about, well, this will sound good in Spanish, even though I'm writing it in English. And I think that's a really interesting mental exercise. You know, that was a play that I knew would live in English or it would live in Spanish. But there was a way in which I had to construct the thinking of the play so it can work in Spanish. So perhaps I take that whole long story to say bilingual theater makes us be honest about how our brains work in the language of Spanish, how our thoughts work in the language of Spanish, and how we are in the world in the language of Spanish, or the world of being Latinx. So I think that it's never really about language. It's really about culture. It's really about feeling. It's about what kind of sentiment can I express in this language, or what kind of sentiment happens when this is said in Spanish. Or when this is said in English, but it has a Spanish overtone. Because I think sometimes we're writing in English, but we're really writing in Spanish, and other times, perhaps it's the other way around. So I think it's a very complex thing to stare at. The most important thing for an audience is to not be afraid. Most writers who write in both languages are really doing a lot to clue you in on if English is your primary language. So I think it's nothing to ever be afraid of. It's something to embrace, because by living in another language for a minute, you will see the world through the eyes of that language, and that'll be a unique experience of the world that you can never have in one language. Well, I think the commitment to Latina writers specifically, it's quite unique. You'd think that there would be replicated companies like this all around, and it really isn't. I mean, it really is a very unique company. And I think that when we look at the entire world of Latinx theater, we don't really see, Brava up in San Francisco is a Latinx theater that's women-centered. But, it's just not common. And I think they've done their own unique work over the years. They've really built a reputation over the years. And they've really sustained themselves. And in the theater world, that's not an easy thing to do. So to sustain yourself over time is the enviable thing for any playwright or any theater, and they have absolutely achieved that. Well, I think the audience should attend the Breath of Fire New Works Lab event, because they're going to get a whole bunch of different playwrights and plays and experiences. Will be a wide variety of work, and I think it's a chance, really the only chance I can think of to get such a large canvas of Latinx work in one fell swoop. And I think it'll be a chance to be in many voices, to be in many worlds, because these plays will invite us to their worlds, and we'll get to be in those worlds for a minute. And, the theater always brings us new worlds, and we never know what they're going to be until we see them. And the excitement of new work is that we don't know what to expect. And maybe the writer wrote it not knowing what to expect, and just let the play reveal itself to them. And so it's the unknown, and it's a great place to do it. Go experience the unknown.